Yes,
Are
he
you
did.
serious?
This is so much fun, you guys, because yes, he did. That's crazy.
I'm JJ Heller,
And I'm Dave Heller.
and this is Instrumental.
In every episode, we explore the instrumental moments that made our guest who they are today.
We hope our conversation reminds you that every second matters because none of us knows which moment will be the one that changes everything.
Big love happens in the small moments.
Hey everybody, it's JJ.
And it's her husband, Dave.
And I hope that wherever you are having a fantastic week this week.
And I hope
Oh no.
that it's sunny where you are.
Oh. Okay, everybody. We have a very unique episode for you to listen to today. Most of the time, we sit down with people and we have a conversation and they tell their stories and it's amazing. And then every once in a while, somebody will be telling the story of their life and they will have a real-time epiphany in that moment. And we catch it on tape and it's pretty amazing.
Yes, this conversation did not go the way that I anticipated, but I am very glad. Our guest this week is Steve Taylor. He's a bit of a Renaissance man. He kind of dabbles in music, in production, in education, in filmmaking. He's kind of got a lot of plates spinning.
Yeah, pretty talented guy.
And he's very captivating to listen to.
Yeah, amazing storyteller. Our conversation with Steve begins with the story of how he got his start as an artist in the Christian music industry. At the time, he was working as a youth minister, but everything was about to change. Here's Steve.
There was a thing that happened every summer in Estes Park, Colorado.
Music in the Rockies.
Yes, exactly. And I had a friend who helped run Estes Park. His name was Jim Chafee, and he finagled me to get a slot at lunchtime to do a couple of songs. And I had never performed live with a band, so I put a band together. And, I wasn't uncomfortable on stage. I brought a little attitude. But what Jim and his wife did is they told all their friends is when I get on stage, just go crazy. And so there were plants all the way through the audience. And I did 2 songs. And I mean, I'm not saying I didn't perform well. I did fine. But hearing all those screaming people, I don't know if Billy Ray Hearn, the head of Sparrow at the time, got the music, but he got the reaction.
Wow.
And so he literally met me at the side of the stage when I got off and said, I want to do a deal with you.
Oh, that's amazing.
That's how I got the recording contract.
It's the Beatles effect.
What did you send to Jim and his wife to thank them for?
For your career.
They are lifelong friends. Jim's wife, unfortunately, passed away 10 years ago. But I mean, I would just spend a week with Jim and his wife, Solveig, in Florida with my wife and me. So we're still like lifelong friends. He's been
amazing.
very instrumental through the years in
Yeah.
helping me out.
How did you meet Jim?
Well, that's another interesting story. So I was a youth pastor, and our church would invite the Continental Singers to come perform on Sundays. And so one year, the Continental Orchestra played at our church, and the conductor's wife got ill during the concert and needed to go to the hospital. So I rushed her to an emergency room. She ended up being fine. But while she was being treated, the conductor came after the show, and we're sitting in the lobby and we're talking. And he wants to know what I do. And I told him a little bit. I do some music. He said, well, if you're ever in California, you should come out and visit me. And so about a year later, I had been doing these demos that ended up being, my first album, I Want to Be a Clone. And my barber had connected me with a guy in Boulder who now owned a bookstore but used to be a publisher. And so he set up meetings for me to go out to L.A. and meet with mainstream music people. So while I was there, I had some extra time. So I call up this conductor, and he said, yeah, come on up and see me. So I go up to see him, and somehow he thought I was somebody else. So when he saw my face, he barely recognized me. And so he pawned me off on his friend Jim Chafee, who also worked at the Continental Singers. And, could you say hi to this guy or tour him, take him around or something. I got no time for this guy. So Jim and I just immediately hit it off. He said, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm running tapes around. He said, well, can I listen? So he listened to a tape. He said, wow, this is really good. And he picked up the phone and made 2 calls and got me in to see the A&R person at Word and the A&R person at Sparrow, because I didn't have any connections with Christian music people.
So I just want to get my facts straight. So
Yes.
Jim was involved with the Continental Singers?
Yeah, so he was like the talent booker at the time for the Continental Singers. And they also the head of Continental Singers also did Christian artists in the Rockies. So that was the connection.
And Jim at the time lived in California and not in Nashville?
Correct, yeah. They were California-based
Okay, and where in California?
in Thousand Oaks.
Okay, so LA.
Right, yeah.
So you are a youth pastor
Yes,
working in Colorado.
yeah,
You make your way out to LA
yes,
because your friend, the bookstore owner,
yes,
set up some meetings for you.
correct.
You end up going to see the conductor of the Continental Singers while you're there.
Because he told you to.
Yes,
and
then he doesn't recognize you.
and then
Yes.
you meet your future lifelong best buddy.
yes. That's well put, David. Exactly.
we need a flow chart.
But it gets weirder because Jim, he makes these calls and I'm like, wow, I like you. And so he says, so what are you doing next summer? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, I'm going to take a Continental Singers tour to Poland next summer. Is there any chance you'd want to come along and be my assistant director? Now, he's known me at this point for like 15, 20 minutes. And I was kind of interested, but I said, Continental Singers, like, what you do is fine, but that's not really my thing. And he said, well, I get that. But he said, it'd be a chance to have a trip and go to Poland and hang out. So I ended up going with him and being with the Continental Singers for a summer. And I mean, I don't know if you've seen them, but they're like a choir that does like hand choreography and very snappy and peppy.
Yeah,
and,
it's not very rock and roll.
was not really my thing. But Jim and I became like lifelong friends. And, we played before these big crowds in Poland. So it ended up being a great experience. Yeah, so I've always had a soft spot for the Continental Singers.
What did your music sound like at the time?
It was like punk, like The Clash was my biggest influence, but, I liked a lot of the English kind of new wave artists, and certainly within Christian music at the time, it didn't have any parallel. And that was, I think, partly why it caught Billy Ray's ear and partly why other labels were not interested. I mean, I got turned down by Sparrow a year prior. When I was out in California, I've told this story many times, but I'm meeting with Warner Brothers and Arista and different labels like that. And their reaction to the music was, well, we like this music, but we don't understand these lyrics. They're kind of Christian-y, but kind of satirical. Like, we just don't get it. So it's like, we like your music, but we think your lyrics would probably offend our listeners. So then I thought, well, if it's the lyrics, let's see what Word and Sparrow think. And their reaction was, we don't like your music and your lyrics would offend our listeners. So that pretty much has defined the rest of my professional career. I have a degree in music, and I'm really good when it comes to theory and composition, but I can't play anything. To the point where I almost didn't get my degree because I couldn't pass piano proficiency. So I have always had to collaborate with musicians because I can't accompany myself. I remember the first time I went to the studio to try to play a piano part, and it was so bad that we ended up having to record one hand at a time. So that's always been like the constant is I would get musicians together. I could write out parts for them. I could sing parts for them. So I always had kind of a producer's mindset as well. But I can't play anything and still can't to this day.
Well, okay, so when you go with the Continental Singers, are you a part of the Continental Singers?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you're not playing your original music. You're just a part of the choir.
He's snapping and clapping along
Yes,
with
I'm
everyone
snapping and
else.
clapping and doing the hand choreography. Yeah, I was his assistant director, but that didn't mean I escaped having to be in the choir.
Okay.
Like, Occasionally when Jim had to go do something, I would step up to the conductor podium, but otherwise I'm in there with the rest of them, smiling and waving my hands.
And okay,
Wait,
so
I want to know if you remember any of those songs.
I do. I don't want to talk about it, but I do. No, I was thinking about them the other day. It's not that they're bad songs. It's just that, it's just got nothing to do with what I'm interested in or really was interested in back then either.
So Jim's invite for you to go to Poland is essentially, hey, free trip to Europe.
Right.
All you have to do is put on this shirt and learn these songs.
And do this
Yes,
choreography.
because we all wore matching outfits too.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so while you're doing this, are you thinking, well, this relationship with Jim is going to go places because he's a fan of my music, so I'm putting in this time? Or is it just sort of like, well, whatever, I'm young?
It was really just a chance to go to Poland, and he seemed like a good guy that would be fun hang.
Okay.
Yeah. There was no other long-term plan. There was no vision of, oh my gosh, if I could just sing with the Continentals, my life would change.
Okay, so like with this opportunity at Estes Park, you have this conversation with a record executive. When that's done, do you think to yourself, oh my gosh, my life has changed?
That evening, Jim and his wife Janice took me out to dinner in Estes Park, and it was like a little celebration. But Jim said something that I remember really well. He said, this is kind of a big deal for me too, because when I've seen other friends succeed, it's always hurt a little bit. Like I always felt a tinge of jealousy, and this is the first time that I'm just genuinely happy for my friend to succeed, which was a big deal for anybody to admit. And of course, I knew it was genuine, but there was that would not have happened without him. That was purely a gift that he had made happen.
Wow.
So it was a nice moment.
What was the age difference between you and Jim?
Jim is 5 years older, I think.
Okay. He's got a little bit more life experience.
Yes.
And do you even know why he took a liking to you?
That is a fantastic question and something I haven't thought of, because we just kind of hit it off immediately. Like he was kind of low key and just a guy who, for whatever reason, I just immediately trusted. He's probably the opposite of the guy that I thought I was going to meet. So maybe that worked into it too, because the guy that I thought I was going to meet was kind of upbeat and, kind of, hey, and Jim was not that. And just the more I got to know him, the more I liked him and really liked his wife. I ended up living at their house because I was traveling a lot. So I lived with them for a year and a half or 2 years until I got married. And he's a fantastic cook as well. So I don't cook at all, but I would just watch him cook and we'd talk while he was making meals. And weirdly enough, never learned a thing watching him, but we had some great conversations. And he's just been just a great friend. Yeah, geez, that was like 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
So...
Did he have any future involvement with your career as things unfolded?
No, his boss, a guy named Cam Flory, who started the Christian Artists Seminar in the Rockies, helped kind of negotiate the deal, but Jim never had any financial stake.
Okay.
Outside of continue to be very generous to me and letting me stay
Stay
at
at
their
his
house and
house.
stuff like that. I mean, I did pay rent, but it was not very much. There was a weird year-long interim because they also had a group kind of in their orbit that was like a musical comedy group called the Jeremiah People. And this is a group that would travel to colleges and churches. And I was very familiar with them growing up and always liked them. And so I had the opportunity to actually direct that group for a year. I loved like theater and was really excited about the opportunity. So I got a record deal, but I'd already committed to doing this musical comedy group. So we recorded the record, and then I left on tour for a 9-month tour with the Jeremiah People, traveling across the country for about 4 months, and then the record comes out. And I don't know anything because all I know is what the record label's telling me. And the record label is saying, wow, it's going pretty well. Like they're sending me reviews, and it's just a 6-song EP. So I'm doing some radio interviews and things like that from the road where the bus would pull over and I'd find a payphone and do an interview. And the rest of the group was very accommodating. But we got to Houston to do one of our shows at like this kind of small auditorium. And this is when I knew something was happening. You know, it's the Jeremiah people. It's like musical comedy. And they had a radio station that was playing some of the tracks from I Want to Be a Clone. And so we show up there, the bus pulls up, and there's already a line waiting. And it's all these kids like kind of punked out. And like they were just like, whoa, who are you? And they all came, evidently, somehow they'd gotten the word that I was going to be there, and they came expecting like a Steve Taylor concert, which I didn't even have a band at that point. So the whole evening was one of lowering their expectations. I came out and said, you know, thanks very much. And, you know, they're excited. They're like yelling and screaming and stuff like that. And said, you know, what you're going to see tonight is not anything like what you hear on the record, but thank you for caring. And so that was the moment when I realized, oh, maybe something's going to happen here. And of course, we finished the tour, and then it was time to put a band together and start getting serious. This is going so far back, most of your audience could care less, but after it was called Meltdown, was the full-length album. There was a video that I did that came along with it for this song Meltdown at Madame Tussauds, where we shot it at a wax museum, where the song is about someone turns up the heat at the wax museum and all these famous people start melting. And, you know, it's a good song, and it was a clever video, and that just kind of took off.
Is where is it distributed?
It's just starting to be a thing. So MTV picks it up for some play. It wasn't like a big hit, but it actually got plays on MTV, and music videos had just become a thing like the year before. Yeah. So I think the label thought, well, Steve has gone to film school. Let's give him $5,000 and knock yourself out. And I just got a bunch of friends together that knew stuff because I was still living in L.A., and there was a kind of a low-rent wax museum on Hollywood Boulevard called the Hollywood Wax Museum, and I made a deal with them on the Monday that they were closed that we'd rent out the wax museum, and the curator was kind of like a budding special effects guy. So it's just one of those things where all these things came together. Everything that should have gone wrong went right, and it turned out to be good.
What that sounds like to me is it's kind of the 1980s equivalent of being like an early adopter on YouTube. You were on the cusp of this kind of tectonic shift that happened in youth culture, and you just found yourself like, even though you didn't knock it out of the park, you still had like, you were a beneficiary of all of this exposure that happened as a result of just being at the right place at the right time and not messing up.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. Yeah. We just all exploded. Like the next year, the Dove Awards come out, and Artist of the Year was Amy Grant, Sandy Patty, Jimmy Swaggart. These are the nominations, and me.
Wow.
Like together again. Yeah, it would just happen very quickly after that.
How old were you at this time?
I was 25, maybe, I think.
Okay.
I think I handled it reasonably well. You don't take celebrity seriously because, number one, it's a different type of celebrity when you're in this kind of Christian music world. And second, you know, I don't think I would have taken it seriously anyway. I wasn't like 18 years old and, wow, what's this? You know, I had a few years under my belt. And,
you just, I feel like from what I know of you, you just kind of like lampooned your way through life.
Yes, that's probably true.
So it was like you never saw the glitz and went like, this is real. Right.
Well, also, too, and I someday I'm going to write a book about how punk rock changed my life for better and worse, because if you're into punk rock, by definition, you can't be impressed with any of that stuff. And so if you have any kind of a punk rock ethos, you are automatically suspicious of success. And by virtue of selling well, means on some level, you've sold out whether you know it or not. And so any kind of like success like that means, well, I must have done something wrong if that many people are liking what I'm doing.
And was that in the back of your mind, that's kind of the narrative that you're telling yourself, shoot, I guess I've joined the man or something like that.
Right. And so you're always looking for ways to prove that you haven't join the man. Like, you're tweaking the man. Like, Elvis Costello had a line, I want to bite the hand that feeds me. I want to bite that hand so badly. Like, that was kind of I was not a jerk. I was always polite and respectful, but I was also always looking for ways to just kind of subvert things.
You're up for Artist of the Year with all of these like traditional CCM acts, and here is Steve Taylor, subversive, lampooning artist. Is it safe to say that even though you reached that level of notoriety, that you didn't necessarily feel like you fit in with that crowd?
Oh, yeah, that's very safe to say.
Okay.
By the way, I did lose, so just in case you were wondering, I lost.
Shocker.
I was constantly reminding myself that even though musical styles or what I was doing was very divergent to what most of it was doing, I was always trying not to be a jerk about musical taste, because I'm really a snob when it comes to music, but I tried to keep that to myself as much as possible. But still, there's a celebrity quotient to all this, which is anathema to following Jesus, right? Who made himself of no reputation and took on the form of a servant. And that's probably the biggest head turn. You know why all this exists, and you know why some of that is inevitable, but it doesn't have anything to do with Christianity. And so the people that get in trouble are the ones that stop remembering that that's a strange way to live. They just kind of accept it as being, well, this is how it is. No, we can't really ever get comfortable with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that Christian celebrity will always be a contradiction.
Yes, that's right. And then you're also within a genre of music that doesn't always fit comfortably within people's expectations of what Christian music is. And that was a two-edged sword as well, because that was what got me a lot of more mainstream press interest. But the satire that I was using, like, that was a very hard thing for a lot of fellow Christians to go with. They weren't comfortable with that. It was quite a stew.
Did it ever feel lonely at all?
No, because I always had good friends, and don't feel sorry for me at all. I had plenty of support and a great record label and all that stuff, but it became harder and harder to exist within the kind of Christian music world. And the big reason was a few years later, all these televangelist scandals started happening with Jimmy Swaggart and Jim Baker. These are names that are so old now, it's hard to even remember that was a thing back then. But kind of similar today, a lot of Christians lost faith in these public persona Christians, right? And so the Christian record labels reacted by saying, well, man, we got to have our artists responding and doing more church-oriented type of music and letting everybody know that we're with you and we're not like that. And I don't know, just kind of reassuring the fellow Christians. And I just was not interested in doing that at all. And so the last record I did for a Christian label was called I Predict 1990. And it was in many ways just a reaction, like, oh, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do? Well, I'll show you. I got a record for you that had nothing to do with any of that. And it was, my lowest selling record. And I think even before the record came out, I just told the band, this is probably going to be it. I wasn't going to leave angry, but I just put out the word after that I'm retiring from Christian music. And I didn't really know where I was going to go after that. But I just knew that I didn't see a future there.
Did you already have the notion, like prior to it even coming out, or even while you're making it, people are not going to like this?
Yeah, it was feeling that way. And I was pretty much right.
Which is very punk rock, so success there.
Yeah, way to go.
Thank you.
Punk rock points.
I mean, it wasn't a catastrophe. It just had sold less than the prior one. The tour did 20% less business than the prior tour. You just could kind of feel like,
momentum.
I see where this is going, and it's probably time to call it a day. My wife and I moved to England And I produced the first album I'd ever produced for a kind of a folk duo that I like called Phil and John. Made an album that I'm really proud of today that also did not do them any favors commercially. But in the process, I got to know a couple other guys, Dave Perkins and Lynn Nichols. We started talking about, well, what would it be like if we started a band and had nothing to do with Christian music, just was a rock band trying to be the best band we could. It just sounded like a blast. Like, yeah, let's do that. Two of us lived in L.A. at the time. Of course, my wife and I at the time were in England. We're kind of everything's in storage. And Dave lived in Nashville. And so we decided to move to Nashville, partly because of, it's easier to tour out of Nashville, and partly because there was just so many places to play live. And on the West Coast, especially in L.A., like at that point, there's just not that many options. And plus, we just wanted to get our thing together before, people could see it. So we did that, and we recruited a drummer and a bass player here in Nashville as well. And the name of the band was Chagall Guevara. That might have been our first mistake, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. If you got this famous artist and this famous revolutionary, and you put the two together, and you have a name that nobody can pronounce, but sounds vaguely European.
They're in a band called like Seagull.
Yes.
Guitarra?
Yep. We heard every variation. And the band was really good. And we played all these like dive clubs without letting anybody know who was in the band, and traveled around in like a couple of station wagons, and, went from kind of living the high life in L.A. to just being like a working stiff in Nashville, just slogging it out for 3 or 4 months. And then when we kind of officially debuted in Nashville, it went over really well, and we got signed to a mainstream record label, MCA Records, and we were excited, and we made an album that we are really happy with. But then tensions within the band started about touring, and some of the guys had families, and they didn't want to be gone, and it's like, whoa, we just formed a band, we just dropped everything, and now you don't want to tour? Like, what's going on here? So the record didn't do what we would hoped it would do, and even though it was not successful for MCA, it was still their most successful rock band. And so they wanted us to do another album, and we just wanted to get off the label. So we just kind of sat it out for 6 or 9 months. And in that interim, the head of Star Song Records, which had Newsboys at the time, we were just a kind of an up-and-coming Australian band, he calls me and says, hey, they're getting ready to do a new album, and they need help with some lyrics on a song. Any chance you'd want to get with them? And at that point, I was just sitting it out. We didn't have any money. We're just kind of trying to write out our contract. So I was like, yeah. And I got with Peter. It's the drummer of Newsboys at the time. Ended up becoming their kind of key songwriter and fronting the band eventually. He's the one with the shaved head. He's Australian. We kind of hit it off great. He played me the song, and I remember listening to the song thinking, yeah, you really do need help with these lyrics. I think the original lyric, the chorus for I'm Not Ashamed was... I'm not ashamed to let you know I have no fear of men nor foe.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah. So I went to work on the lyric, and I don't think he had any verses at all. And he knew he wasn't a very good lyricist, so he was really into this idea. But he played me some other songs, and it's like I'd heard to do some research, I listened to their prior albums, and, they really weren't any good. But I liked what he was doing with this new music, and he was particularly good with melodies. I said, hey, why don't we produce this track? We'll take it to the record label, and if they like it, I'll produce your next album. And so we did, and they liked it, and I ended up producing that album, and then pretty much wrote all the lyrics for that, and then for their next 2 albums after that. And that album became a big hit, and that was kind of what launched me into producing.
What did you rewrite that chorus to be?
I'm not ashamed to let you know I want this light in me to show. I'm not ashamed to speak the name of Jesus Christ. And even though all the members of Chagall Guevara were Christians, we had gone to so much work to try and not make that the thing about our band. We just did not want to be tagged as a Christian band. And here's this lyric, I'm not ashamed to speak the name of Jesus Christ. And it's like, I like this. Like, yeah, let's do that. years later, Sixpence comes to me about producing their next album.
You're at work writing the lyrics for the Newsboys.
Right.
And producing their stuff.
Yes.
And Sixpence None the Richer comes to you and they go, love what you're doing with the Newsboys?
If you'd heard the Newsboys stuff, unless you just hate pop music, you would have to think, well, this is pretty good. Because they didn't sound like a ripoff of the current bands, right? They had their own thing. And that got refined over the next 2 albums to where Take Me to Your Leader, I think that's just an awesome album. It doesn't sound like they're trying to be another band.
Yeah.
Sixpence also knew me from my albums. And so I think they were looking at me as someone who would get their music. They didn't need a new sound or anything like that. In fact, I liked working with bands that hadn't done good work before because there's no place to go but up.
Yeah.
And then I listened to Sixpence's prior albums, like, oh, these are really good. Like, I hope I can not screw this up. So I came into that project with a very different mindset, and they were already a great band. Plus, they didn't need me as a lyricist. Having said that, Matt was very open to being critiqued. Like the original version of Kiss Me, if you heard it, it was like a dirge.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't recognize the song if I played you the original demo of Kiss
Wow.
Me. The lyrics were kind of weird and dark. And when I heard that song, it wasn't like the light bulb went off, but I liked the melody. And I thought, well, this has potential too. It's a good story. I just really liked the band and, wanted to do right by them. But they were on an independent record label called REX at the time. I ended up seeing their contract. It was like the worst contract I'd ever seen.
Oh, no.
Essentially, they had signed a contract that was going to keep them in bondage for the rest of their artistic lives. Paid them almost nothing. It was terrible. And then their label goes bankrupt. And so I thought, well, this could be good. And so that the lawyer in charge of this was now in charge of REX. And he's going to come down to Nashville and he's going to talk with the band. So the band asked me if I would go with them. So we step into their office and we go to their conference room, and this new head of the label lawyer guy is sitting at one end, the band's sitting around the conference table, and I'm at the other end. And he starts reading through the contract. Then he closes it and he says, I just want you to know you will be abiding by every aspect of this prior contract.
Whoa.
And I remember Lee, she actually physically gasped. And we were all shocked because we were assuming, they were going to come in and want to offer concessions and things like that. And then the guy looks at me and he says, and who the hell are you? And I said, I'm just a friend of the band's. The meeting is over. We walk out to the parking lot. We kind of circle up. And the bass player at the time, he just breaks down and starts crying. I said, okay, so here's the plan. We're going to breakfast. So I take him to the Pancake Pantry in
Yes,
Hillsborough Village.
which helps
is,
everything.
That's right, helps everything. And so we sit around and we're eating pancakes. And I say, okay, look, we got to just start making music because you guys are going to break up as a band. If there's all these other pressures, you've kind of forgotten why you're a band in the first place. We'll figure out a way to start making an album. So we actually find a studio that had not been used for a few years off an alley in Music Row. And we move equipment in there. And Russ Long, whose studio we're in right now, is my longtime collaborator and awesome friend. And he agrees to engineer the album because he'd done all the Newsboys stuff and had worked with us as a live mixer for the Chicago Bar when we toured. He agrees to work for nothing. And I just put everything else on credit cards. And we start making the album in this rented space next door to the Evil Empire's Nashville home. And so while we're making this record under their nose, they have no idea that we're actually making it, right?
Wow.
And the process was really fun, and we had a good time. But going back to Kiss Me, so we're working up kind of a different arrangement of Kiss Me. I'm at the board. Matt is playing guitar behind me. The rest of the band is, in the studio, and Lee's in a vocal booth, and we're kind of pounding down Kiss Me. And we just had hit this groove that was just like undeniable. And I'm like, grinning from ear to ear, and I turn around to look at Matt, and he is not feeling it at all.
Oh, no.
He's just like,
Too happy.
so we end, and I said, so what do you think? And he said, I'm just not feeling this. I said, I typically wouldn't do this, but I just said, man, can we just keep running with this for a while because I really think we got something here. And so he kind of agreed, and we went ahead and did the track that way. And then when it came time for the lyrics, the original lyrics, I just didn't feel were cutting it. But he's a great writer, and so I just took the lyrics and just like crossed out lines and said, fix this, fix this, fix this, and gave it to him almost like it was a homework assignment. And, at this point, the band can always say, no, this is what it is, because they're ultimately the boss. I'm there to serve them. But Matt was the kind of guy that I think he trusted me, and he just is always ready to make something better. So he went back and he worked on it, and he turned it back in, and it was better, but it still wasn't there. And so I said, I think this and this need fixing. And he went back, and we went through multiple revisions until we got to the final version of Kiss Me. And I think, at that point, Matt's kind of making peace with the song. So we got this album, and we're still stuck with this evil empire that we haven't talked to. And what are we going to do? So we went back to the previous record label, and it was like, I'm pretty good at negotiations just because I don't bluff. I think I went to the record label and said, so this is what's going to happen. We can either see you in court or we can work out a settlement, but we will not be making a record for you. That will never happen. So I think the head of the evil empire just decided the best thing to do would be to cut their losses. And the band at this point, they're exhausted with the music business. They don't trust anybody. They want to see if I could figure out something on my own. And I have no desire to start a record label or anything like that. But Charlie Peacock had just started Rethink, his first record label. And he's a good friend, and it felt at least like in the realm of possibility. And then I ended up meeting another guy who had some experience. And so we cobbled together this kind of record label proposal. And Word was the one who said, we'll give you complete artistic control if we do this together. And they really supported us way beyond any other record label would, because it took about a year of really hard work. But I mean, ultimately, it was the band that worked really hard, making almost nothing and just working and working and working. And they would play for these radio stations for their staff at lunch, and we'd pay for the pizza. And they'd play a little set, like an acoustic set. And two things happened. One is it was a time when most bands couldn't play. And Sixpence, like, they're so young, but they really could play their instruments. So that would impress radio stations who were used to hearing pop music where nobody can play anything. And then they were just really nice and really humble. I think a lot of those stations just decided, if we're going to do one nice thing for a band, let's make it for this band, even though they don't have piles of money and cocaine to give away. Our cocaine budget was so low. Yes.
It was a different era.
It was a different era.
Did Matt ever come around to going like, this is all right?
Well, I think they're all happy. Like, having a hit like that is a mixed blessing. I don't think anybody in the band would say that song didn't change their life, because it did on every level. But it changed their life in good ways and bad. A hit like that, that's number one in 10 countries around the world and played at a royal wedding. And I make a joke that if you've never heard Kiss Me, it means you were raised by Amish parents or you've never shopped at TJ Maxx. Here's the phrase. You can't buy a hit, but you have to pay for a hit. It ultimately costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep that momentum going. And it wouldn't have happened if the song wasn't already hit material, but there's no way to get it on the radio without spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to make that happen.
It changed the band's life. Did it change your life?
Yes, in good ways and bad. The label got started to give Sixpence a home. We didn't sign any other artists. The deal that I ended up negotiating for them in the context of doing this within Word is like unprecedented. Like, their manager at the time, who worked with all these big artists, said, no, I've never seen a deal that generous. But when the song became that big and that successful, like, all of a sudden, all these other forces start coming at work. And this thing that was formed to support our friends becomes very difficult to maintain when you've got now outsiders coming in who want a piece of it and have had nothing to do with any of it. And they certainly don't understand the idea of wanting to take fellow Christians who are making great music and give them a world platform. They could care less about that. You know, they think that's privately ridiculous. So it changed in a lot of ways that were a drag. I was not savvy as just to how much money powers everything. You know, people who've worked in Christian music, they're always talking about what a screwed up business it is, and it kind of is. But when they say that it's worse than working in the mainstream, it's like, oh, I can tell you it is not. You don't have any common backstop when you're working with Sony or Warner Brothers or whoever. You might meet some good people in there, but those systems are designed for one thing, and it's maximize shareholder profit. You know, there are just a lot of people who are ruthless. And it's one thing to talk to somebody and have to decide if the advice they're giving you is good advice or bad advice. But it's another thing to talk to somebody and wonder if there's anything that they just said that is actually true or if they just made that whole thing up. And that's exhausting. So after 4 years of doing that, it just became exhausting. And frankly, I just wasn't enjoying it anymore. I wanted to reinvent the music business. You know, that's all. So
Is that too much to
yeah,
ask?
is that too much to ask? So we did contracts where it didn't matter how good your lawyer was. And that's one of the reasons lawyers didn't like me, is because we made them as transparent as possible. If you come in and you've never done something before, this is the deal that you'll get. It doesn't matter who your lawyer is. You won't get this deal anywhere else. It's more generous than anybody else would give you, but this is the deal. But there wasn't any negotiating involved, which infuriates managers and agents and lawyers because essentially their job has been taken away. And, you know, a smarter guy would have figured that out, but I didn't figure it out. I just thought, well, this is how I would want to be treated as an artist. It's kind of like back in the day when you'd go to buy a car.
Yeah, your CarMax.
Exactly. If you just go in and you know what the price is, okay, I'm good with that, right? Why can't we do this with the record label? But there's so many forces that don't want it to be worked that way, and I'm a little slow on the uptake when it comes to things. Like I kept hearing, you know, people saying it's not, you know, it's business, it's not personal. I'm thinking, oh, it's personal for me. Like I didn't do this because I wanted to be in business. It's very personal. And, you know, they just didn't see it that way. And that would make me angry. And that never does anything any good. I mean, there were times when I wanted to punch somebody. Like I just, when it went away, it was really kind of like a severe mercy. It hurt for a while, but I have not regretted it since, and it's certainly something I'd never want to do again.
Do you think that there is a way to somehow sidestep all of that shenanigans, or do you feel like it's just baked in and you kind of went in sort of rosy-eyed?
It's a good question. There might be a way to do it, but you would probably need to be a very wealthy person. Anytime you're using other people's money, that makes things difficult. The head of Word Records, what I meant to tell you is Jim Chafee was the one who made that happen. So he was working for Murr, which is a division of Word. So he set up the meetings and got them excited. And the head of Word, a guy named Roland Lundy, was just a guy who, you know, no pun intended, was a man of his word. We shook on a deal, and certainly there were contracts involved, but he said, I'll support you. And man, I remember we were like a year in, and we were spending a lot of money, and we were just not getting the results. And I met with him at a bagel place on West End, and he said, so how are you feeling? I said, I'm not sleeping. He said, well, okay, if you're losing sleep, that means I don't have to. And he kept funding us for another 3 or 4 months, long past what anybody else would have done, in the belief that this would break. And of course, it broke beyond anybody's expectations. If I had met Jim all those years ago, I don't think any of that would have happened.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like Jim is responsible for your initial record deal as an artist. But then if it weren't for Jim, you also would never have had the success of Kiss Me as a single, because he's the one who opened the door for that as well.
Yep.
Okay, so that leads us to like this next chapter, which is making the Blue Like Jazz film.
Right.
And Jim was managing Don Miller.
Right.
So what's Jim's involvement with Blue Like Jazz?
That's wild. I just realized, I think Jim was the guy who told me I should read the book. But when I met Don, Jim didn't have any connection with him at that point. But Don was actually familiar with my music career. And so that kind of smoothed the introduction. In fact, I think it might have been Al Andrews who brought Don to Nashville for the first time to do a book reading at the Belcourt. And, you know, I go to the Belcourt all the time. That was the longest line I'd ever seen at the Belcourt. It was wrapped around the block.
And people don't know what the Belcourt is.
Oh, yes, that's right. We have a national audience. Yes, so the Belcourt is the kind of art house movie theater in Nashville. It's right down the street from where I live. And Blue Like Jazz at that point was just a book that people were talking about. It hadn't hit the bestseller list or anything like that. But he came to town to do a reading. And I mean, I love the book, but it's not a book that you put down and you think, oh, I see this movie in my head. Blue Like Jazz is Don Miller's memoir about moving from suburban Houston to Portland, Oregon, getting a home with some other guys and that was nearby Reed College. Reed College is famously, I think the Princeton Review called it the most godless campus in America, famously progressive. Steve Jobs went there for a semester to learn calligraphy, and it's just like another world. Don wrote about his experience auditing some classes and hanging out at Reed College and getting to know people, and essentially found some other students who were Christians but didn't want anybody to know because that was how unpopular that would have been at Reed College. And so every year at the end of the school year, they put on this big kind of bacchanalia party called Ren Fair, and it's just like 3 nights of sex and drugs and, you know, naked elves and whatever. So in the middle of all that, Don and his friends built a confession booth, and they dressed up as monks. And all these students, you know, in all these crazy costumes line up. They think they're going to confess their sins in some kind of ironic way. And instead, they come into the confession booth, and Don and his friends end up confessing kind of the sins of Christianity, all the reasons why people wouldn't want to have anything to do with Christianity, you know, as forgiveness for the times when Christianity has not been a reflection of who Jesus is. Done in a way that broke down some resistance.
Yeah. Invited people in.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, they're high as well. So that probably helps
More
too.
receptive. Yes.
They're a little more in tune. Yes. And it's just a really powerful moment in the book, and just hit me really hard. I just thought, like, this is the next movie I want to make.
So you went to the reading.
I went to the reading.
And the line is longer than you've ever seen.
Yes. And Don is really good in those situations. You know, he's winsome and he's funny, just an inviting guy. So we talk afterwards, and I pitched him on the idea of doing Blue Like Jazz as a movie. And I think at that point, even he'd had some other people kind of mention it, but my pitch was, but your character should not be a guy in his early 30s who audits classes. I think your character needs to be a college freshman who lives that experience. And Don was immediately like, yeah, that makes sense. I said, I realize you don't know anything about me as a filmmaker, but my prior movie was going to be opening nationwide that weekend. And so if you get a chance, why don't you go see it? And then we can talk next week. So we saw the movie. It was called The Second Chance. It was a pretty good movie. And he liked it. And he called me up and said, you know, I'm interested. Is there any chance I could work with you on the screenplay? The answer to that question is always no.
Really?
Yes. And the reason it's always no is because they're attached to the book, and it's just a different craft. And then it's particularly true when someone's written a memoir, because now you're dealing with their personal story, and they are going to be attached to that personal story, and they're going to want that personal story to be told as true to what really happened as possible. But what really happened and what makes for a good movie story are not the same thing. In fact, they're never the same thing. You need the freedom to make it into a movie story. So I said, that's probably not a good idea. And he sounded kind of disappointed. So I kind of hedged and I said, well, maybe what we could do, the problem is you never written a screenplay, you don't kind of even know the language. So if you went to a screenwriting seminar that I recommended, and if you had a good experience and still wanted to do it, then maybe we could figure out a way to make that work. So he agreed. I sent him to Robert McKee's screenwriting seminar, he's kind of like the internationally recognized kind of guru of screenwriting teaching. He was there for 4 days. He went with his friend Jordan. He loved it. Came back like pumped up and just kind of reinvigorated. So my other collaborator, Ben Pearson, and I flew out to Portland, Oregon. We met with Don, and we started working on how to turn this memoir, which is really just a loose collection of essays, stream of consciousness, into a movie story. The journey to get that to screen was probably the most frustrating experience I've had in my professional life. Within a year, we had a script that was feeling really good. And in the meantime, Blue Like Jazz goes from being kind of a thing that people are talking about to like 34 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Like it's a full-blown hit. And I'm thinking, fantastic, this is going to be easy, raising money for this. I'm not interested in funding it through a studio because I know that if they do it, it's now their movie and they get to say what it is and what it isn't. So it's going to be private equity that's going to fund it. We thought it would be about $3.8 million. So we start making the rounds. The one thing that I was a little concerned about is the movie was going to be edgy because you can't tell the story of someone who's a student at the most godless campus in America without showing the reality of that. And so I was sure it would be PG-13. I was afraid it would probably be R. The screenplay certainly reflected that. So I thought, well, I wonder if some people have a problem with that. But again, I'm slow on the uptake. So I just assumed I'd find my people. And 4 years later, we had gotten almost nowhere.
Wow.
And I'm not exaggerating. It was 4 years of just constant thinking someone was going to step up and then they wouldn't. And it was really frustrating. And we finally connected with a guy in Seattle who was a great guy and who believed in the project. And he was willing to put up $500,000. And of course, that wasn't nearly the 3.8 that we needed. But then we found another guy in Los Angeles who was willing to put up $250,000. So we're now at $750,000. And it had been taken so long, and we had our lead actor lined up, Marshall Allman, who was a fellow Christian who was really excited about the project, but he was working on True Blood at the time on HBO. So he's going to have to go back to work on True Blood in December of that year, and it's like mid-October, something like that. So we got this window, and I'm like, I don't care. We got $750,000. We're just going to make it. I'll figure out how to post it later, which you never do. I was just at the place where I could not imagine life without this project getting made. That's how vested I was in it.
Was this your full-time occupation? Like, did you have anything else going on?
No, I had music royalties that were paying the bills.
Yeah.
And so that was what had given me the freedom to even do this. But I wasn't making money at all. So the night before we were going to open our production office, the guy in LA called and he said, I'm sorry, I'm out.
Ugh.
So, and there was no way to do it for $500,000. So I was caught off guard and I called Don and told him, I'm looking at it as, oh man, I can't believe it. I got to tell Don, but somehow we'll figure it out, right? And Don, who has been through 4 years of this, at that point, he just felt sorry for me. And he decided that, now at this point, he's famous. So he posts on a blog, the movie's not going to happen. It's dead. And, I was thinking, well, it would have been nice for you to tell me first. But he just thought it was best to just,
Rip off the
Make it
Band-Aid.
public.
Yeah, rip off the Band-Aid. So the reaction was, come on, you got to make this. And two guys in their early 20s in Franklin say, look, we don't have any money, but here's our idea. There's this new thing called crowdfunding, and there's this new website called Kickstarter.com. And we think that there's a lot of people like us that would be interested in this project if we, made it a project on Kickstarter. Don says, what do you think? I said, well, let me do some research. So I check out Kickstarter, and at that point, it had been around for 9 months maybe, and go right to what's the biggest movie project that's been funded. It was like maybe $70,000 or $80,000, but we needed $250,000. And I just didn't see it happening, number one. And number two, now we were going to go from private conversations with wealthy people to like a platform where a lot of people would know about our failure. And I just wasn't that anxious for a public humiliation along with the private humiliation. But I went and met with the guys in Franklin, and they were just so full of, energy and idealism and naivety. And
Does it remind you of yourself?
it did, yes, that did. I remember you guys. So, so they kind of laid out the plan, and I said, I just don't see how this can work because there's just no precedent for it. Like, we need $250,000. Thankfully, the guy in Washington had said, I'll match whatever you raise. So that at least made it so we could lower it to a goal of $125,000.
Yeah.
But that had never, ever happened in the history of crowdfunding. I said, told them why I didn't think it would work. And they just said, well, do you have any better ideas? And I didn't. So 3 days later, we launched the Save Blue Like Jazz campaign. They did so much of the work, but it needed a person behind it. So I ended up being the person that was launching it. But they worked crazy hard and had such great ideas. And it hit its goal within like 10 days. And by the end of the 30 days, raised $345,000,
Wow.
4,500 backers. And it was the most successful at the time crowdfunding campaign in history. And in fact, Kickstarter, the people would tell you that was the moment when they realized, oh, I think we got something here. Blue Like Jazz came out. I'm mostly really happy with the movie. It was a movie that I wanted to make. All its mistakes are mine. I can still watch it and be mostly happy with it. And it was the first time that any kind of faith-based movie like that got into a major film festival. So it debuted at South by Southwest.
Wow.
We had a great screening. It was so much fun. And it just felt like there was so much momentum behind it. I had put everything into that movie as far as money-wise. And, as the music business, as royalties have been rapidly declining, it was coinciding with the fact that I'd been working on this movie for 7 years and needed it to be a hit. And it felt like it was going to be a hit. And it came out, and it just wasn't. It did some business, but it only paid back half of the money to the investors, which is, if I had a choice between our investors getting paid back and me not getting paid anything, I'd always take the investors getting paid back. That still hurts to this day. And so what I thought was my expectations on that and the results were vastly different. And it's a hard one because it's all condensed. It's like an election night. You're working for 7 years in this case, and it comes down to about a 3-hour window on a Friday night. And we're all together in my house, and, we've been doing all this marketing and social media campaigning and all this stuff. And we start getting early results from Roadside Attractions, our distributor. And it's like, yeah, it's doing some business. And you could just kind of tell, like, that's not quite what I was expecting. And then by the end of the night, it's like, oh, crap. Like, this is not going to be the hit that we thought it was going to be. And it's just the weight of that comes so fast. It'd be like running for an election for years, and then it all comes down to election night, and there's the results. So now I'm not sure what is next. I just had no backup plan. I do that a lot. Like, I don't have a plan B. It's like, this has to work. And sometimes it works really well, but not always. And this was one of those times.
Can we circle back? Because I really loved kind of tracing this thread of Jim Chafee. At what point in time did he become Don's manager in the production of this movie process?
We were working on the screenplay, and I introduced Don to Jim, and we ended up working at Jim and Janice's house. And there were a lot of moments around their table when we're working on the screenplay as well. Jim had a smaller kind of talent booking agency, And so they ended up working together, and Jim ended up booking Don for appearances, and are still friends. And, Jim and Ben are the co-writer, Marshall Allman, the star of Blue Like Jazz, Jordan, who appears in it. We were all Don's groomsmen at his wedding.
That's amazing.
And Bob Goff was there. Bob Goff did the ceremony.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So I met Bob during that process too. It was great.
You were a tenant at Jim's house in California,
Yeah.
and then he set you up with your record deal.
Yep.
He also made the Sixpence record happen.
Yeah.
I mean, he opened that door as well.
Yes, with the
With
association with Word. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
He hosted the screenwriting for Blue Like Jazz.
Yep.
Does he come into your story again with any other form of did he introduce you to Lipscomb or something like that?
Yes.
Are
he
you
did.
serious?
This is so much fun, you guys, because yes, he did. That's crazy. He's just been around for so long that I forget this. Yes, he did.
You owe
Wow.
Jim
I
Chafee
guess I'm
a
gonna-
really, really nice dinner.
I guess I better start saving for that. Man, Panera, here we come. So I was thinking, you know what? I wonder if I should go back to school. I had no formal film education. So I thought, well, maybe if I got an MFA in filmmaking, that would be a good reset. I would learn the things that I never learned except by doing them. So I started checking out programs, but there was either going to be, in the Northeast or Chicago, or there's one in Florida, but there's nothing in this region. And Jim, we had a mutual friend, and she knew someone who was in administration at Lipscomb University. So Jim set up a lunch meeting with her and the person who was heading up their theater program at that point, a guy named Mike Fernandez. So the four of us meet for lunch. I'm so glad you reminded me of this because that's crazy. So we meet for lunch, and the theater guy says, I think we should make a film program, and would you be interested? And he said, but I don't want to start with an undergrad program. I want to start with a grad program, like an MFA in filmmaking. And he says, so you could come and you could start the film program, and you could also get your MFA while you're putting this program together. Essentially, you're going to fly the plane that you're building while you're building it. And he was a younger guy, and he just had a lot of energy, and I'm just thinking, yeah, well, that's not going to happen. But I humored him in the conversation, and I liked him a lot. And so I said, well, that sounds interesting. Why don't you let me know when that's going to happen, and we can talk more. And that was the last I really thought of it. And 4 months later, he said, so we got the green light. Are you ready to go? And somehow he had gotten funding for this from the university. And so all of a sudden it became real. And I didn't know anything about academia outside of having gone to college. And so I'm getting schooled on that. And I'm getting schooled on, how you put a class schedule together. And all the time I'm thinking, well, if I was going to a film school, what would I want? And what I would want was practitioners who had done this before, but were also good teachers. And how hard can that be? And it turns out it's really hard, and especially when they're supposed to have grad degrees, because that's the whole thing about academia is you're supposed to have what they call a terminal degree, which is an MFA in the arts. So we start checking around to see who has an MFA in town that knows anything about filmmaking, and it's virtually nobody. And if they do have one, they're already working someplace else. So we start cobbling these things together. It was a little touch and go at the beginning, but what that position allowed me is to start finding people who really did know what they were doing. And Mike Naraki is a friend who's the co-creator of VeggieTales, voice of Larry the Cucumber, wrote all your favorite silly songs. And he found out what we were doing. We had lunch, and he just sounded intrigued. And VeggieTales had just kind of finished its run. So we talked. So it's like, well, why don't you come and you can be an artist in residence and you can get your MFA, and then, maybe you could join our faculty. And that's exactly what he did. He's a fantastic teacher, but he's also, beloved. And he's got a new project that he kind of birthed in one of our classes called the Dead Sea Squirrels. And it's about some squirrels that are in first century Palestine, and they go swimming in the Dead Sea, and they end up in a cave for shade, and they end up, frozen in time and salt encrusted. And 2,000 years later, an archaeologist and his 8-year-old son and his friend, they're screwing around, and they find these 2 salt encrusted squirrels in the cave and near the Dead Sea. The boy smuggles them back home. He puts it up in his window, but it smells bad, so he opens the window in his bedroom, and it rains that night, and they reanimate. And so now he's got 2 squirrels that were alive during Jesus' time. Hijinks ensue. And so so he starts it off as a book series, and now we got the funding. In the meantime, we also started an animation program with Tom Bancroft, who's a Disney animator who first job was animating young Simba and the Lion King and Mushu the Dragon, on and on. He starts an animation program within this school that I'm developing and directing. So now we've got this killer animation program. So now we're making the pilot for the Dead Sea Squirrels. It's also got a theater program. And, most theater programs don't have anything to do with film programs in most universities. But the problem with most film students and the projects that they make is that they know how to run a camera, but the acting's terrible and the writing's terrible. But now we've got all these actors within the same school, so they're collaborating with each other, and it elevates the acting, and the writing gets elevated. And so we keep bringing in more and more practitioners to where now, if someone says, where's a good film school? It's like, well, unless you don't like Nashville or you have a thing about going to a Christian university, you should come to this one, because I think we're doing great.
Wow.
And it's a education in the arts unlike any other, because for one, when you're 18 years old, most people who are creatively minded, they don't know exactly what they want to do. They just want to know they want to do some in the arts. And so this is a playground where if you're a film major, we want you to take a songwriting class or a graphic design class. And all that is going to make you a better filmmaker.
What hearing your Lipscomb narrative reminds me of is going back to you having a vision for what you want your music to be, but not necessarily being able to execute it without the collaboration of a band.
Right.
And here you have developed a lifetime of experience in collaboration.
Yes.
And have just carried it forward into your experience building a film program.
Yeah, and I was thinking, at Lipscomb, you've built an environment where artists can thrive. And that's exactly what you did for Sixpence when you started the label. You just wanted to create a place where an artist could thrive. So it's kind of this rhythm that's really amazing.
There is no buzz like seeing one of your film students. I teach a songwriting class too. And so some of the film students have taken songwriting classes, and then it turns out they're really good. And so they are now developing their artistry as songwriters and recording artists, and they're making their own music videos, and they're, performing live, and it's all happening on campus. And there's just no buzz like seeing that happen and watching them collaborate with each other and kind of building their tribe.
Yeah.
And man, it's just been so much fun to watch.
The story that we've been telling is largely the story of your creative journey that has again and again been tied to the generosity of Jim Chafee sharing his social circle with you. As you draw that line from Lipscomb all the way back to the Continental Singers, who do you think Steve Taylor would be if he hadn't run into Jim Chafee?
Yeah, life would be very different. I forget how many touch points there are and how he connects to so many of them. He has certainly been a huge blessing in my life. And he's also the kind of guy who would never once remind you of any of that.
Where do you think you would be? Let's say that you had gone to L.A. and you just hung out
with conductor.
That conductor.
Yeah, I probably would have stayed in Colorado, and I was making enough money that my brother and I were going to buy a house together, which would have meant I would have been stuck in Colorado. Not that Colorado isn't a great place. It's a great place to live. It's not a great place to launch a recording career or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, would you know your wife?
No, I wouldn't know my wife because I met her in California. weirdly enough, you could attribute this to Jim Chafee too, because I met her at a at the record label. That was the first time I met her, and the second time was at a Continental-related thing where she was helping a friend out.
So you have Jim Chafee to thank for your professional career and your marriage.
And my marriage, yeah, I really do. Yes.
Well, thanks, Jim.
Yeah, way to go, Jim.
Yeah. God bless Jim Chafee.
Okay, I know that most of what we do is just sit around and listen to people tell their stories.
Yeah, basically.
But like, I kind of want to do the George Costanza, like, good night, everybody kind of thing right now, because that was awesome.
Yeah.
You know what's really fun about this is that I sent Steve this recording of our conversation, and he sent me a text back and said, hey, I just want to let you guys know I'm going to take Jim and his wife out to dinner with my wife, and then we're going to play this conversation for him so he can hear how much he's meant to me. And I just think that's so great.
Yeah.
Well, we're grateful to Steve, and we're grateful to Jim.
Yeah.
Because this episode wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Jim Chafee.
That's right. I feel like this episode is a beautiful tribute to the power of friendship.
Thanks so much for listening, everyone.
This episode of Instrumental was produced by me, JJ Heller.
And me, Dave Heller.
Our theme music is my song, Big Love, Small Moments.
That I helped write. You can always listen to JJ's songs by telling your smart speaker to play music by JJ Heller.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Instrumental, so be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.